guys, it's me, Vicky Bunny, r/entitled parents, where we will read My entitled relatives tried to force me to marry a man I had never met before. When I was 22, my extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. began asking me why I wasn't married yet. I spent my childhood and early 20s in a fairly conservative North Indian state, and people in those areas tend to be deeply misogynistic, and the only way a woman has any value in their eyes is if she's attached to a man. Her own accomplishments, talents, etc. are of no consequence. So it wasn't all that surprising when I began getting these ridiculous questions about marriage while I was still in college. I had recently lost a lot of weight, and for the first time I actually looked good in jeans. My weight loss seemed to cause their queries to reach whole new levels of idiocy. You see, they all assumed that the only reason I had lost weight was so I could land a husband. Surely I hadn't done it for the sake of my own health and well-being, or because I wanted to look good for myself. That would be preposterous. My aunt, about whom you've read in this post and this one, was friends with a matchmaker. Matchmakers in India are these cunty middle-aged women who have nothing better to do than to go around carrying photographs and info about eligible bachelors and bachelorettes and share them with the families of young men and women who are looking to marry them off. My aunt's friend was no different. She showed my aunt a picture of some guy in his late 20s who also had a great job and was from a respectable family. Let's call this guy AJ. My aunt shared the picture and the info with my grandmother. Go read these posts to know exactly what the person my grandmother was. Between the two of them, they decided that AJ, whom I had never met before, would be the perfect match for me. Keep in mind that neither I nor my dad had any inkling of what was going on. One afternoon, I think it was Sunday, my aunt came over when I wasn't home. She told my dad to get his daughter dressed up and pretty, because she had promised me to a guy and his parents were coming over to see that very evening. The tone in which she spoke made it sound like she had done me and my dad a big favor. My dad was shocked and asked what the hell she was talking about. She told him she had taken it upon herself to find a groom for me without my knowledge or consent, and taken some of the burden off his shoulders, and that their mother, my grandmother, had approved of the match. My dad told her he would have to speak to me first, and whether the guy's parents can come over or not depends on what I have to say about this. The little cunt actually tried to convince my dad that my consent wasn't necessary and that as elders, they had every right to make this decision for me, but my dad wasn't having it. When I came home a few hours later, my aunt greeted me with a hug. This was enough to send red flags flying everywhere. I asked her what was going on, and she gleefully told me that she had done and how her proposition had my grandmother's blessings. I told her to shove it up her A, and that I was in no mood to have an arranged marriage. Not then, not ever. She looked shocked and asked how I could say such a thing after all the trouble she's been through in order to find such a wonderful young man. For me, I decided to get dirty. I told her if the wonderful young man is making her so wet, why doesn't she go marry him? My dad heard this and told me to watch my language. I told him I would if this biche knew her place and knew not to poke her nose where it doesn't belong. My grandmother had heard the commotion from her room and called out to my dad. She began telling him about how she had seen the guy's picture and the matchmaker had told them all about his family and how a match like this may not come along again. My dad told her that he would never force his daughter to marry if she doesn't want to. My stepmom said the same. I merely told her she was insane and belongs in a lunatic asylum. This of course caused both Grand Monster and Crazy Aunt to fake cry and go on and on about how my dad doesn't trust him to make the right decision for his daughter, and that they were family and family was the right to make decisions for each other. What the actual F, biche? I wasn't going to budge, however, and told them I wasn't going to meet the guy or his parents, and aunt better cancel the meeting if she knows what's good for her. Aunt left our house grumbling. But the drama was far from over. My grandmonster, in order to emotionally blackmail my dad into agreeing to the match with or without my consent, stopped eating. Anytime food was brought to her, she would break into crocodile tears and whine about how my dad was dishonoring her wishes. As she was diabetic, her health began to deteriorate. My dad was scared. One evening, he and my stepmom sat me down and asked if I would consider the proposal and just have a meeting with AJ's family. I was still adamant and said no. My aunt came over again and said she had great news as AJ's parents were still interested in meeting me and they would allow me to study and have a career after I married their son. I asked her what part of the word no did she not understand the last time we spoke and who the F do AJ's parents think they are to allow me to do anything. Aunt once again flew into an impotent rage and asked how I could be so selfish, how I could disobey my family like this and some other BS about how marriage is a union between families and not just individuals, and how in her days girls were married off as soon as they reached adulthood whether they liked it or not. I let her go on for some time as her little hissy fit was quite amusing to me. After she had exhausted herself, I told her that if she, grandmonster, or even my parents even tried to force me into this marriage, I was going to cut my wrist. And if I survived, the cops would know that I did it because I was being forced to marry against my will and all involved would be in a world of trouble. Even if I died, I would leave behind enough evidence in the form of emails to all my friends and college professors detailing how I was being mentally tortured so I could be forced into the marriage. Both outcomes would result in all of them in deep legal shiz. I even showed them the email I had already written. All I had to do was send it. And if any of them even think of locking me up and taking away my phone, laptop, etc., they should remember that my vocal cords still work and I would gather the entire neighborhood with my screams and cops would surely be called. As I spoke, my aunt's eyes kept getting wider and wider. She was in shock, but she knew me well enough to know that I was very capable of doing all of this. She left quietly. Grandmonster must have heard every word. Because her hunger strike came to an end, my aunt never tried to look for a match for me again. Later, my dad told me that he was only asking me to think about the match and that he would never force me to do something I didn't want to do. I told him I knew that and assured him that my threats were only meant to scare my aunt, and they worked. Dang, guys, that is just a terrible experience being forced into something that you don't want to do, and no one should ever live in such terrible conditions, and I'm sad that she experienced this and having to just go through such traumatic thing, Comments. I'm glad you have sane parents. Hopefully the sane people will outnumber the entitled ones eventually. I like the marry him yourself suggestion. I would laugh if you gave the matchmaker pictures of your aunt and grandmother and told her to find someone for them. I'm sorry you're going through this. I'm Indian too, and so many of my cousins have been forced to get married. My mom was forced too, and she repeatedly tells how much she hates it. At least I know I won't be forced unless my dad suddenly decides to get me married. Don't let them force you. They have no right to decide how you're going to live your life. All the best! Here's another post by Donovan10. He commented, I am an Indian male. My grandma tried to force me into marriage after I returned to India from Harvard. I have a girlfriend there and we have a very stable and wonderful relationship. We are getting married December 2020. She actually told me that I should not marry a foreign slut and instead marry an Indian girl with good virtues, and she tried to set me up with her best friend's granddaughter because she had promised me to her family. From that day, I stopped talking to my grandma. It's been hard, but you gotta do something sometimes. Well done for not letting yourself be treated like property. Relatives really should know better, but far too many do not. It must be rough to realize she doesn't give a shiz about your feelings, but it might make it easier to remain no contact with her. India is pretty backwards in such aspects. A lot of my family wanted me to have an arranged marriage. It's a long story. Should I post it? And then some people just say, absolutely. One comment said by Tabitha, my dad refused to get an arranged marriage, ran off to the US and married my mom. My grandpa likes my mom, but there's still some underlying BS. According to my dad, my grandpa focuses so much on getting me married to a nice Brahmin boy and moving me to India because he failed at doing that to my dad. Apparently, he has 4 men lined up to meet me. My dad has been making up excuses to make me from having to deal with this BS. Ah, the lovely Indian tradition of forcing the daughters off to be married. I know it. I've been there, except my Indian grandfather didn't give a shiz about my Chinese grandmother, was so on board with it. Kudos to you, OP, for canceling that noise. You don't need that. You're absolutely right. If he makes her wet so much, probably just a few drops, then she should marry him herself. A good match is hard to come by, right? Okay everyone, thank you all for watching my video. Subscribe to read more Reddit posts with me and see you guys in the next one.